Okay, so as everybody kind of filters in, I'll make two observations. First, if I got my notes right, I think that this panel is, at least our goal, is to synthesize ugly babies, Gatorade, Tesla, Procter & Gamble, all under the umbrella of technology transfer. So we're kind of starting with that goal, and we'll work from there. My name is Dave St. John-Larkin. I'm an attorney with Perkins Coie. I'm also a graduate of the law school, and in a long time, I guess, friend and family member of the Silicon Flatirons family. This is my first time moderating. I've been a panelist a few times before, so I'm actually a little nervous about it, but a little excited that I actually get to channel my inner Weiser or inner Bernthal or whoever you want to describe. What I'd like to do, I'm not going to read through bios. You have all of that in front of you, but I would like to just kind of have a chance to introduce our panel. We have an excellent panel for you to wrap up the day. And I think it's one of those conferences as well that not all the good things were said. So I think we actually have a few things lined up for you, discussion points that should be interesting as well, and not something that you've already heard about ugly babies. So to my immediate left is Jean Bernard. Jean is a partner with Kilpatrick, Townsend, and Stockton. Jean is a phenomenal patent attorney and a nice guy to boot. So we've been on a panel a couple times together, and he's the head of the, or co-chairs the Electronics and Software Practice Group, right? Okay.
Correct.
So, and right next to Jean is Kate Tallman. No, Kate, you're down on a little bit. Tracy. So Tracy's not listed in the program, and she's actually a late addition to our panel, but an addition that we're very excited about. So Tracy works with a company called Collective IP. She's the director of business development, and if you look at her background, I think you're on LinkedIn, Tracy. That's where I found. If I found the right Tracy, that's
you did.
I've got the right background. You've had a little bit of a background in bio and pharmaceutical consulting, and so I think there's quite a bit we're going to end up talking about with respect to her current employer and current company. To her immediate left is Kate Tallman. Kate is the Associate Vice President for Tech Transfer at CU, and as she said earlier today, she's Chief Bureaucrat, or bureaucrat at least, to some of the departments around the campus. So Kate's one of the people you'll engage with if you ever do engage with the TTO on campus. And then to Kate's immediate left is Jana Watson-Capps. And Jana and I are actually setting, I think, a new record, or at least something for the scorebook here at Silicon Flatirons. We now have 2 people with hyphenated names on a panel at one time. So I think that's a record. Pretty excited about that.
Need a triple hyphen.
Yeah. And Jana is a chief of staff and head of strategy for BioFrontiers. And before we kind of launch into some of the more substantive questions, the two kind of maybe unknowns, at least on this panel, maybe for some of you at least, I'd like to have Tracy and Jana describe a little bit about your organizations. And I think most of us have heard throughout the prior 2 panels a lot about the Technology Transfer Office, so I'm going to pass on having you describe that for us immediately, Kate. But Tracy, if you could start by giving us some background on what is Collective IP, what do you do?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for including me today, and thanks for letting me be a late addition. It's actually pretty exciting for me. Collective IP is, in essence, a software platform that both industry and scientists and everybody in between can come to discover the innovation story, as we like to tell it. So as we've talked about, I think, through several of the other talks today, it's not just about the IP, but it's also about the researchers or the institutions doing the work, the granting dollars that funded that, the publications that come out of it, and if you're on the life sciences side, the clinical trials that might advance from those inventions and innovations. So we really came at this problem that there wasn't one great place that you could come to discover what's going on in your particular area of interest, in your area of innovation. So our platform really addresses that problem. bringing in both sides of the equation, not only the industry side, but also the tech transfer side and the researcher side, bringing all of those groups together to really make this full story of innovation and make it easily digestible and organized. So that's what our platform does. That's what you can find on our platform.
Okay, great. And Jana, can you say a few things about BioFrontiers?
Sure. My name, oh, yours did that part. BioFrontiers Institute is a institute at the University of Colorado. We're a multidisciplinary research institute, and our mission is to bring scientists from the life sciences, physical sciences, engineering, math, computer science, all together to work on complex bioscience problems, and then to partner with industry to make those discoveries relevant. We're interested in building collaborative partnerships among different disciplines, allowing graduate students and undergraduate students opportunities to do the same and to train in that environment, and to encourage our faculty to start companies and to work with companies so that the discoveries they're making can be useful for society. So we work in those areas.
Great. Great, thanks. So from one of the questions in our immediate, or the prior panel, one of the topics that came up was this topic of open innovation. And that's kind of one of the topics I'd like to start with today. And so Kate, I'm going to throw this down to you as one of our first topics. We've heard a lot about Tesla's patent promise. We've also heard a lot about different kind of new models for how you might license patent portfolios and how you might employ those in different business settings. And so the question really is, with respect to technology transfer operations, is there a new model afoot? And how does open innovation, how do you see open innovation entering into the equation for technology transfer?
Thanks. So I think that we heard from Steve at the Mayo Clinic, who told us that when he was working there, 50% of his licenses didn't have anything to do with patents. A lot of times when we're transferring innovations, the transaction is more of a research collaboration transaction than simply a license agreement. So I don't know if it's a new model, but it might be a new way to explain what we're doing and a new way to define the mission. So whereas if you go to Technology Transfer 101, they tell you that you receive an invention disclosure first, and then you assess it for patentability and commercial potential, and then you decide whether to patent, and then you license it to a startup or an established company. What's happening now as the value of patents is really changing in many industries. So while it's still, patents are central to many life sciences industries, chemicals and materials industries, patents are becoming more often used or seen in patent pools or in cross-licensing situations in other industries, and the patent is really not the right thing to be at the center of the relationship. So what we're seeing is, Larry talks about the Sweden model. I'm watching the University of British Columbia and some really interesting things going on in Canada and the way that they're looking at innovation.
What's that model, or what's typical of that model?
Well, they have a term they call knowledge mobilization in Canada. And so what they start with is they're looking at the innovation, not just the invention and not just the patent. And so the innovation, depending on the nature of the innovation, what is the best way to make impact with that innovation? And what is the best way to get it out there? So in the Tesla example, you might use a patent as a tool. And you might, if you have a plan from the beginning, deciding what you're going to do is important, as we learned on the last panel. If you decide from the beginning that what you want to do is create a new industry with a breakthrough innovation, you can purposefully put it into your federal proposal that that's the plan from the beginning. And there might be patents involved, and you might put a patent together, and you might put a patent out as a way to say, you can come and play in our sandbox, but you need to help us create an open standard around this new industry and grow it together with us. And that's just one way. But the traditional startup model is still a very very good way to do technology transfer. And we're very fortunate in our community to have so many talented entrepreneurs right outside the university and talented students who help move these opportunities along.
Mm-hmm. And so I'll put the next question then to Jean on this concept of how you commercialize innovation within the technology transfer space, as well as in the kind of the broader community. Denver, I think, is in a fantastic situation right now. We've got a lot of kind of ancillary companies that are part of our ecosystem, maybe that weren't there, a decade or so ago. We have incubators, we have accelerators, we have a variety of other, stakeholders, and when dealing with, the question about whether to patent and how you might employ a patent to commercialize a technology, what works best in your view? Is it a more of a holistic model that you're assessing the innovation? Is it that you start first with a patent?
Well, I take the point of view from being a patent attorney that when a client comes to me asking whether or when should I get a patent on something, I'll tell them as soon as possible, just because the longer you wait, the more prior art can be used against you, and the more you're likely to disclose it before you patent it, which, as the patent law has progressed, makes it all the more difficult to get that patent and then to enforce that patent. So from a legal point of view, the sooner the better. From the point of view of whether or not it's going to be a commercially viable product, that's a much more difficult question to answer. I think if people knew in advance whether or not their ideas were going to be valuable, they'd be very rich, and they wouldn't even need to come to me because they could just live off their current wealth. Nobody really knows for sure if things are going to be really valuable, ideas are going to be really valuable. I think the people who get it right a little bit more than they get it wrong are famous entrepreneurs, people like Larry Gold. So I would say that from the business side, I think you just have to trust the instincts of the business people. I know on the earlier panels they were saying that a patent is only a small fraction of the talent and luck it takes to get a business going and doing well, and I would completely agree with that. I've been in many situations where I've seen a relatively lousy patent portfolio, but a very successful business despite that. In fact, they often come to firms like ours after they start making some revenues, and then we try to clean up that patent portfolio. So clearly, that wasn't the seed that started the company doing well. And then I've been in other situations where I've seen great patent portfolios, and that's the only thing left in the bankruptcy estate. Right.
Well, at least it's left. So another question then is Kate, you mentioned that there are different kind of models, and maybe they've been pre-existing, but maybe new ways of viewing how we make decisions about what to patent and necessarily what technology to commercialize. One of the obvious things you'll see from this panel is we have two people with a set of experiences that are part of this kind of new ecosystem, or at least visibly part of something that didn't seem to be there at least a decade ago. Tracy, I'm going to start with you as far as when an investor comes to you and says, gosh, we'd like to start a business. Are they looking at a certain technology already? Is it the technology transfer office that has initiated typically that conversation and then hires you, or is it how does that work typically, or is there a typical situation?
Yeah, we're a little off base on exactly what Collective IP does, but somebody who is looking to start a business would already be using our platform. We actually are, although sometimes we get asked to, actually on a fairly regular basis, sort of be in that sweet spot. Do you think this is worth it? Do you think this is something that's worth putting on there? We try and take the standpoint of, I think as we've talked about it from other panels, let the market decide and let the business team behind it give it the manpower and give it the legs that it should. So we don't actually make that decision, but we certainly have that question come up And in our minds, it's really more of a matter of, the entire team that you've put together, the entire story that you put together, and I think we keep alluding to that same thing. It's not just about the IP, it's about everything else that surrounds it.
And then, Jana, as far as your interface with both the Technology Transfer Office and the broader university and trying to accomplish several goals, we've had a long discussion running prior to this panel about some of the different goals that we see a university fulfilling, or at least some of the end goals that we might imagine might be in place. And obviously there could be a commercialization goal that a university might take upon itself. We heard from earlier panels that there could be, there are instances where it seems to be more academic focused. We're looking for opportunities for students to develop a business sense. What is most helpful, in your view, at least as far as promoting innovation within a university environment? Is it having a kind of a hybrid approach, or is it having more of a unilateral student first, academic first, or commercialization first platform?
So that's a pretty long question, so I'm going to unpack it a
Yeah,
little
sorry.
bit.
Yeah, take your time.
I think if I back up a few steps, that for our organization, and maybe I can just speak for me personally, that the goals of the university are to educate, to discover, and to benefit the society around them. And you do that through discovery and education and making those discoveries available and perhaps useful. And so as a larger goal being that, then working with the Tech Transfer Office offers an avenue to do that, and so that's great. What we try and instigate and foster and nurture and reward is co-creation of new ideas. And a lot of times this is between different disciplines. A computer scientist who realizes that his program that deals with a whole bunch of Halo data, I don't know if you guys, how many people in this crowd play Halo, but it's an online game and there's huge amounts of data, and he's found that he can use the same models there to track the life cycle of a parasite that causes malaria. And so by putting together people who might be unlikely collaborators, they can make a really big transformative discovery, something real and useful. And that, besides just between different disciplines, if you put entrepreneurs next to basic scientists, that this might happen too. And so we're hoping to make that happen more often. The whole idea of this giant building on East Campus is productive collisions, people from different disciplines running together. We have a few companies in there. We'd like to see more of that. We'd like for people to run into each other.
I think in the law school they're referring to that as boundary jumping, and it's but it seems, I think it's the same idea though, right? It's cross, interdisciplinary, cross-platform,
And I think it fits all of the different goals, or the 3 different goals of the university I mentioned. It provides education for students. We have a biotech club that involves law students and MBA students and engineers and scientists and things. And so you learn from bumping into people that are different than yourself, and then you learn from being able to watch them work and then work with them. So I think that working with the Tech Transfer Office is really helpful. I would like to see more sort of easier and clearer ways about co-creation of new ideas and how that works legally with patents and licensing down the road. And I think that might help foster more of the type of thing that would hit all 3 of the original university mission goals.
And so one of the prior panels had mentioned that they kind of described 3 kind of categories that I was writing down, at least, that a technology transfer organization might undertake. One is that it might be a builder. They might just capture the innovation. The other was that they might enable it. There might be this way of commercializing entities and helping young businesses start up. And kind of that third category would have been as just purely the licensing, like I think it was the Berkeley model. And what I'm hearing, I guess, is that maybe we have roles to play for each of those models within the broader most university settings. And I guess I'd ask, do you think it's that binary? Do universities employ just one model, or is it usually more of a multidimensional model for how they operate?
So I think that it has to be multidimensional. I think that the best way to approach it is to put the research group at the center of the conversation and be a service to them, like the first panel discussed. We provide intellectual property management services, tools, consulting to help the research group achieve their goals for making an impact. That's the role that we play. Now, there are universities that have access to a lot of funding to build a big commercialization infrastructure up around their technology transfer offices, usually not in their technology transfer offices, usually alongside it somewhere. You know, we don't have those kinds of resources right now, but we are in this community where right outside the boundaries there are a lot of talented entrepreneurs. So the question is, do we need to even have that kind of infrastructure if we can get deals done efficiently? And that's what we've been focused on for the last decade, is building a way to get deals done and be a reasonable business partner.
You know, do you feel that that's kind of the consequence of, you know, what we kind of all seem to hear is that maybe there's a shift underway to more of the ideas economy, and, you know, as we move away from kind of the world of widgets and physical, you know, goods as being kind of the center of our industry, that that sort of reorganization makes more sense now in a university setting?
Yeah, I think that, you know, the trends that I see happening are that major companies may be downsizing their research and development departments to become more system integrators. And the large company job is to understand their market really well. They understand the customer need. And actually, that information is proprietary information, closely held information. So they want to collaborate with universities, because the only place left where basic research is going on is the universities. So to have these very narrow and deep areas of science going on, a tool like collective IP can help companies discover where that niche is, because it may not be somebody in your backyard, it might be somebody at University of Kansas. But companies can then access that narrow and deep expertise in order to solve problems. But that brings up a whole nother set of challenges around confidentiality and around some of the informal intellectual property concerns that we have.
Jana, at BioFrontiers, have you had situations arise with, as far as like co-location at all, of you know, different academic departments, or you know, pulling in third parties to work on projects, and experience with that?
Certainly, yeah. So we have a lot of our faculty are entrepreneurs themselves. They've started one or more companies, and so they often work with that company afterwards. Maybe a postdoc is on a sponsored research project. There are ways for even a grad student to do an internship with that company. They have relationships with larger companies that want to get access to a particular tool or screen or something that is particularly useful to them. We also have interests where they just want to hear what's going on and be a first ear on the ground, if that's the right term, to hear what's happening, and maybe something will match up with what they're doing. So we have a lot of interest from people that are working in the building that want to partner with industry, and also with industry that wants to partner. It's not always, you know, the match is very specific, so it's often a lot of exploration, and you find a few really great partnerships out of that. The people that, the companies that work in the building are often looking for sort of incubator lab space where they don't have to build it out themselves, as well as a scientific community, so it's more than just looking for research partners.
And it seems, and I guess, you know, what we've discussed on the panel is that there's quite a few new opportunities that organizations have, both within the university as well as outside of the university, for co-locating you know, commercial and university-related research and commercial endeavors. You know, I guess I'll throw it to the whole panel. You know, what's your experience with it? What challenges do we have in that sort of co-location world where we have companies that might coexist within the same location as the university departments? Are there philosophical differences that we need to be concerned about? And what's the take on it? Does it present any challenges from an IP perspective even?
Yeah, I guess I'll start on that and say that from the point of view of a lawyer in private practice, instinctually, I kind of don't like those collaborations because you know that there's, or maybe I should like them, because you know there's going to be potentially a lot of legal issues and legal business coming down the road. And let's start with the fact that who's made an inventive contribution to the invention, which is not just simply a matter of who gets their name first on the patent application, which some academic researchers think is the most important part of the whole patenting process. But in fact, it's a legal requirement for everybody who's made an inventive contribution onto a patent. And getting back to the constitutional discussion we had in the last panel, each of those inventors in the United States is the first owner of the intellectual property rights created by the patent always. Most of them go on and assign it to somebody else, especially if they work in a company, but they are those first owners. And if they were not put on and should have, they can come back later and demand to be put on, and then can create havoc in terms of who owns this patent, because you may have people who have part ownership in it that you never realized should have had part ownership in it. So all of those kinds of things are racing through your minds when you're hearing from inventors, oh, we've got this great collaboration going on, and it's kind of informal. And we don't really have a lot of formal structure as to who gets to own what that we create. And you immediately sit them down and tell them there's going to be a lot of problems here unless you get some of these issues discussed and codified.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And Tracy, in trying to understand the storyline of innovation, how do you approach that situation when you've got co-located university and commercial outfits?
Yeah, so this actually goes back not necessarily to what I'm doing at Collective IP, but in my previous life, I have a PhD in science, and I worked in a lab and did that. And just thinking about kind of the gray, sticky areas of one lab borrowing another reagent from another lab that they've created, and not having any sort of especially if it's intra-building rather than outside a building, because a lot of times there is a formal MTA process. But as Jean was saying, I mean, there's a lot of gray area and sticky area that if you don't do it right and think about the consequences as you're lining up these collaborations can be a headache later. Mm-hmm. But going back to also thinking about doing the science without those collaborations and without that kind of free-flowing information and sometimes reagents as well, you are missing out on some stuff. So I think, I approach this question a little bit more from my previous life rather than what I'm doing right here. But, I think those situations happen all the time where there's, somebody didn't really think about how much that person helped or that company helped or, that amount of money, who gets what. So, I mean, absolutely. More work for Jean.
Yeah, exactly. Do you see a rise of collaboration occurring right now between? I
mean, I certainly think so. Both Kate and Jana said something alluding to it. You see this whole kind of gutting of external R&D departments in the pharmaceutical companies, which is a function of them needing to save money, and also a function sometimes of them saying, we're not doing the latest, greatest out there. The academic and hospitals and all the other research institutions are. So they're gutting, internal R&D, and they're creating huge external R&D departments that thankfully use our platform to help them with this process, as Kate highlighted. But also, you see it in, so J&J Innovation Centers are, they positioned themselves in San Francisco and in Cambridge, specifically to be near those academic and hospital institutions that are on the cutting edge of particular research that they're interested in. So you see it all the time. I mean, it's a model that's been up and running, and I'm sure from the legal side of it, there's we're going to see the trickle down effect of people figuring out exactly the right way to set these up from the start. I don't know the answer to that.
I think it's really interesting the gray and sticky collaboration issue. I think that's where all the action is.
Yeah,
actually.
it is. I mean, that's what you want, really.
Right, but also, that's the issue where if you don't have somebody to advise you, and a resource to advise you on how to manage the intellectual property rights, then what you end up with when you have an innovation is something that can't be commercialized. And so if you don't have that intellectual property management function, that resource, you're kind of bringing in all these things and talking to the company in the water cooler who's co-located, and then you have a eureka moment, and guess what? There's all these ownership ties. There's all these. So you're using a biological reagent that that somebody signed a material transfer agreement for that gives the company ownership, and so that's the challenge with co-location that I see, is that right now we have this Wild West, free-form academic culture, but in order to actually have, in order to attract a real industry collaboration, you have to have a little bit less of that and a little bit more knowledge of intellectual property rights that are going on.
So just to add to that, I think that's why you see these huge industries locating, these innovation type centers close to there, because they know that the earlier they get in on it, the bigger the piece of the pie. And that's definitely a part of it,
right.
Certainly.
And in fact, what I hear from entrepreneurs and investors is that, universities on the East Coast, they're all totally mined already.
Yeah.
There's no opportunities there because you've got all these big companies co-located right there, hanging out with everyone, having lunch.
And the VCs in their back pocket calling them saying, "We'll have that experiment go today."
Right.
And related to that, there is, I got the sense from some, maybe it's the wrong sense from earlier panels, but there's a lot of outward-looking introspection of other TTO offices. Do you feel that you're competing with other universities, via the kind of the technology transfer operations for these, commercial alliances or kind of co-located situations? In other words, have you had to pitch for a co-location arrangement?
Yeah, so that is really, we haven't pitched like a major company, but Jana and I in my office work together on some of these major pharmaceutical companies that are coming around and wanting to see, and she could probably describe a little bit of the process. She's doing a lot of the heavy lifting on putting the faculty in front of these companies. And I think Monisha actually alluded to that in the panel. The challenge of making visible what is actually going on in those labs is an enormous challenge. Mm-hmm. That is something that there's no efficient way that I can imagine of doing that, other than giving the research groups the tools to get the word out. And even some technology transfer offices are starting to help their faculty with social networking, so that the faculty can start to tweet.
And Tracy, that's also an aspect of where you...
Yeah, that's definitely where our company starts to fit in, for sure, helping get the word out earlier, not only from the tech transfer side, but if you're an industry person, you're a BD person at ExxonMobil, and you're looking for the latest, greatest corrosion technology coming out of wherever, you don't really care. Whether it's a small startup company or Colorado School of Mines, you generally have a hard time finding those innovations without a little help from the tech transfer office publishing something on their website, or perhaps you're going to scour the USPTO. But really, when it comes right down to it, if Exxon is interested in something, they want to talk to the inventor right away. So as Kate's saying, giving those researchers, empowering those researchers to be able to start getting the word out is crucial.
Do you find it's commonplace then? Maybe Jana, this is what you could speak to, is do you have researchers coming to you and saying, hey, we've got 2 or 3 companies, here they are, this is who we think we ought to consider for this, maybe commercializing this innovation, or helping us to figure out what we need next to move the research along? process?
What we've run into, in particular to somebody who just came to visit from a large pharmaceutical company, their wall is more opaque than ours. We know very little about what they're looking for. So you end up, here's 100 things that we're doing. Do any of these match what you're interested in? Yes, yes, no, 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 yes. And it would be great for them to say, this is some new project and we're looking for a tool that does X. That might even, somebody who's working on a similar tool and didn't realize that was a possible application might even move over to this new application and be a perfect partner. But that would never come up without having actually a personal relationship. And so while the, sort of the first line of communication can be the internet and publications and things, that's great. But until we get people who actually know one another, then you don't really get to find out what's going on and to match it, the interest between a company and the faculty. I find the company end more difficult actually than the finding the faculty partner. And but they do want to collaborate. I mean, that's what they're looking to do, is finding someone who is working on the more basic side to flesh out their R&D.
So, and I'll kind of leverage one of the earlier questions from one of the other panelists. I think it was Stephen had suggested about the question of public money, and because there's public money used in developing patents that might be procured through a TTO setting. But I guess I'm curious as well, about the process for collaborating with commercial entities. Do you approach that differently because of the public financing essentially of research and patent procurement and other aspects of the TTO operations? Do you publicly describe those or set out those conversations with a commercial entity, or what's the relationship there?
Usually when a company is interested in a collaboration, they want to meet first with the faculty member, as you said, and second with the intellectual property office to make sure they're dealing with a reasonable and sane human being. And so our office spends a lot of time in these preliminary meetings of a company exploring whether they want to collaborate with the University of Colorado and having a conversation that demonstrates to them, yes, we do 50 license agreements a year. Yes, we understand that not everything is worth $40 million. Yes, we understand there's a difference in the profit margins for your industry. And so that being able to build up that capability is also what's going to enable smoother relationships with companies. But I think we try to publicize that, but to your point about public money, I mean, we're not here to make a sweetheart deal with out-of-state oil companies, right? We are here to understand the value of the base of research assets that have gone into this collaboration and value it appropriately in the context of a collaboration. And the faculty, help us with that by describing what went into their base of assets.
I'll just add, because it came up earlier, the state funding from the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. I mean, their mission is to help grow the economy, and they do invest in infrastructure as well as small companies, and so that has affected how we've designed some things. For example, a sequencing facility that was built with those funds is available for industry to use, and openly so. And so I think that in addition to being a whether we're educating and benefiting society and discovering at the university, we are also to a part seen as an economic driver in the area, and what more can we do to that? And when we take state and federal funds, then that's a piece of it too.
So let me shift gears a little then. One of the things that I think most patent attorneys will tell you is that we're seeing kind of an unprecedented era of change in at least in the patent laws, and I think that's probably also true with respect to copyright and trade secret law. Even has had some pretty revolutionary changes in the last at least decade. So Gene, I'd throw it out to you. what's the impact as far as you can tell right now from growing uncertainty maybe or change that you might see as far as what's protectable, what's statutory subject matter, for instance,
Right.
and what might technology transfer operations or universities do in response,
Right.
or should they do anything in response?
Right. An earlier panel was talking about whether or not a tech transfer office should be in a service model or a licensing model. Mm-hmm. And I'd say if I was investing right now, I'd invest in the service model because in the licensing model, what the tech transfer office is a non-practicing entity, which is the politer way of saying a troll. The way the patent laws have been going these days is that non-practicing entities are some that are quite aggressive, especially ones that have been going after individual small businesses. So you have the case where an owner of a coffee shop gets a cease and desist letter because their cash register was made by a company that is allegedly has some infringing element in it. Pay us $10,000 and we'll go away. And this is getting very political now. It's to the point where states' attorneys generals are getting involved, thinking that there may be some kind of illegal extortion activities going on here. I guess to their surprise, they find out, no, it's just good old-fashioned patent enforcement. What this is creating, though, politically, is a strong backlash against patents in general, I think, by the public that doesn't really understand them very well or their function. As they've come out from companies suing other companies over patent infringement to these non-practicing entities suing individuals who had no idea that they were even in business, much less infringing patents. So the laws are starting to, both on the legislative level as well, and especially on the judicial front, are starting to rein in the rights, the enforceable rights, and the coverage of patents. And this is coming on a number of fronts, and I'll just touch very briefly on it. Those of you who follow the patent law will know these. One front is just make fewer things patent eligible. So software, business methods, which we thought for at least a decade were patent eligible across the board, have now been reined in tremendously. There's a lot of now types of inventions that simply can't get patents on. It doesn't matter if there's prior art or not. They just simply are not patent eligible anymore. Another thing that's happening is that the PTO is developing new ways of challenging patents after they have been granted. And these are creating huge issues with litigants who thought that they could go into court and have their patent enforced, now suddenly having to go back to the patent office to check the patentability again. The net effect has been to slow down the number of patent litigations going on tremendously. There's other issues with damages. How much damages, liquid damages, should you get for infringing a patent? It used to be you would essentially get a certain percentage of the profits on the article or in the service, on the revenues of the company. Now they're looking at very narrow definitions of what the patent covers, so that perhaps in the old days damages were $100 million. Today that might be $100,000 worth of damages. So it makes it very much less interesting for plaintiffs to bring these cases, because after all, a patent case usually costs $2–3 million for a side to litigate. Speaking of which, there's also a lot going on in the law about loser pays, which we never had before. So you have, as a plaintiff, you have to think a lot harder than perhaps you once did about whether you want to bring that patent case, because you may wind up paying the defendant's litigation costs, which are easily, usually for a full-blown litigation, in the millions of dollars. So I'll stop there. I mean,
yeah. Well, I'm curious, Kate, in your experience with the new PostGrant options for challenging patents. I actually had several years back had attended a conference that had a panel of mostly tech transfer leaders, just as these new rules were being announced, and the general consensus there was that it was going to tank their ability to file for patents. They were worried that they would be embroiled in a lot of post-grant patent challenges, which turned out to be fairly expensive challenges to be involved in. Have you had that experience? Have you had the situation arise where you're thinking, gosh, how are we going to defend our patent?
You know, we have had that discussion internally in a couple of cases where, you know, we realized that we need to up our game on checking all of the boxes and making sure that we're doing the right things and getting that patent submitted, and no more quick and dirty provisional and things like that. We need to, if we're going to be, I think what we're moving to is a need to be more selective on the patents, because not everything is going to have that broad value. And so to really focus on the patents that have value and focus on the patents that are necessary to make an impact with that technology. And also just, we need to invest more in each one so that it's less vulnerable to the post-grant review challenges.
All right, I have another totally different set of questions as well, but I'm very curious about them. One of the comments questions I had actually when we were talking and preparing for this panel, I wasn't sure what technology transfer options were available for undergraduates. And I think Kate, you had mentioned, or maybe it was Jana that had mentioned, that it's starting to be the situation that you're getting calls and questions about technology transfer from undergraduates. And it seems like something I guess I would expect, because we see, you know, a lot of new opportunity that's available to students for, you know, working on business skills. What's your sense of that? Is there a changing role for technology transfer operations at an undergraduate level as well as at the graduate level?
Well, you know, we have to think about our mission. We serve, you know, a couple of thousand research investigators. If we open our services to tens of thousands of undergraduate students, we are done. We are, you know, we're going to need to multiply our staff times 10. And so what's happened in the past is that we've given friendly advice to a couple of enterprising students who have invented something in their senior projects class, and told them a little bit about what it takes to engage a patent attorney and what a provisional patent is, and send them on their way. And you know, then in the advent of Facebook coming out of an undergraduate idea, there's a lot of inspiration at the undergraduate level about making a lot of money, and entrepreneurship in general. And there's accelerators springing up on and off campus. There's the New Venture Challenge on campus. There's Idea Forge, which is going to be a makerspace associated with the College of Engineering. There are so many things going on just in CU Boulder alone.
Yeah, do you see more of a kind of a holistic view then, maybe, or a future for technology transfer operations where you might work more with those sorts of accelerators and incubators and stakeholders?
You know, I would say the way we've managed it in the past is, you know, we're just very clear that the university doesn't have ownership in undergraduate intellectual property. And that's usually been the answer that the student wanted to hear.
Sure.
And so that's really the best way to approach it, because of our mission. Is really, I mean, we're serving the research enterprise, actually. So we're not a venture capitalist. And so we can't really do that. There are resources out there in the community already. You know, there are programs. There's the Entrepreneurial Law Clinic here in the law school. So there are programs for students to access, to learn how to, you know, launch their invention. So.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, the amount of interest that we've seen, and it's a testament to the entrepreneurship that already exists on campus, that undergrads are bumping into it daily, and they see that as a future for themselves. And there's many programs. Kate mentioned a few. There's many more. There's the Entrepreneurship Center in the business school. There's one in the music school, one in law school. The leaders of those groups meet regularly. There's Brad runs a great meeting of every person who self-identifies as an entrepreneurship educator on campus, and we take over the Taj restaurant across the street. Thank you, Brad. So there's many places where students can get help starting their own companies, and we've been seeing a lot of that lately. I think that to do a sort of top-down campus overview approach might not serve the students that well, but it's really exciting to see the multitude of opportunities that are becoming available to them.
I would say with the change we're seeing with PhD students, and the fact that there's only the one job open for every 8 PhD trainees, we've seen a difference in the interest level of PhD students in learning about entrepreneurship. And I think it's very exciting. They want to stay here in this community. They might want to take their thesis out into a small company that becomes a translational research company that takes their thesis into prototype. And we've seen these happening, and they've been able to get the federal funding to move it along. And I feel like that is just a key piece of our overall innovation ecosystem, the fact that we can hold on to some of these and our community can support these students as they take the journey out of the lab.
Okay, well, we are running to the end of the hour, and I know the Wiser Rule intimately. So it is time for questions, and I'd like to offer up the first opportunity for some questions from the audience to a student. And as Phil is not shy about telling you, I get the luxury of calling on somebody. If Brad will point them out to me if no one raises their hand. So for questions, everyone. All right.
Do you think the laws that are reining in patent use are going to limit innovation in the future?
Yeah, and again, this is my just own impressions, is that it depends on what kind of idea you're talking about. I think for ideas like developing software, I don't think it'll make any difference at all, honestly, because those folks are going to develop that software anyway. I think for ideas where to actually get them realized and reduce to practice, as we say in the art, will require tremendous amounts of capital. I think that will absolutely have a chilling effect on those ideas if the patent laws are reined in. And one of those areas is, of course, biotech. That's the one that comes to mind the most. Not coincidentally, the one that the lobbyists are most aggressive at trying to preserve and expand patent rights in Congress. The pharmaceutical industry has always been a huge champion of patent rights, maybe a little bit too much of a champion of patent rights, whereas you'll see other even big tech companies trying to rein in patent rights just because they feel fine without patents, or at least maybe they think they do, or they're willing to take that risk because they just want to get rid of these troll cases. That bothers them more. So I think it depends on the kind of idea you're talking about.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
How about in the front here?
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about the ugly baby, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So if you are in the initial stages of a startup and you're afraid your baby might be ugly, how would one go about finding out if that's the case? I mean, what are the correct resources? Thank you.
I'll point down there, Tracy, and
Sure.
you can spot those ugly babies. But
so related to specifically collective IP, we specifically do not do that. But I think Kate brought up a lot of good. There's two problems here. One, I think we've all heard of the inventor or the researcher who thinks that this is the greatest thing ever, and they really haven't done their homework or don't have enough business knowledge to really make that judgment about the commercial viability of that. Fortunately, in this area, in the Front Range, I feel like we have such a great entrepreneurial spirit and a great set of accelerator type, groups and companies and incubators, I think there are a lot of people that you can reach out to really ask for the truth. Getting those people to actually ask for the truth is, a whole nother story, I think, sometimes. So I'm not sure that's under anyone's control except for the inventor themselves. But I think the resources are out there, especially around here.
So you're saying there's lots of ways a baby can be ugly.
A lot.
And so you really...
Several.
Yeah.
But just to go further down that pathway, it doesn't have to necessarily be. It's the whole story. It's not just the idea behind it, because as you said, you have companies that have tons of great patents and they're going nowhere.
Yeah, they could be beautiful babies, just
beautiful
with bad
babies,
parents.
bad parents, and then you have not so great ideas, maybe not great IP, maybe they haven't filed their IP yet, maybe the baby might turn out to be ugly but isn't yet. I mean, there's so many kind of steps in between, but I don't know, making use of the resources around you is absolutely something that, if you're serious about an idea and serious about commercializing something, you really have to start bouncing that idea off of the rest of the community around you. Otherwise, you're doing yourself a disservice and perhaps wasting your time and money and maybe investors' time and money as well.
Yeah, and I would look at the I-Core model, because there's a whole process for that associated with Steve Blank's lean startup model. Go out and talk to your customers.
Yep.
This is just a postscript. All startup babies are ugly.
Exactly.
Because the #1 rule of startups is to start. So,
down in front, and we'll go in the back there.
Hi, Gene. So if you are doing a startup and then you have limited resources, and then you think to yourself, well, gosh, instead of just going out there and producing this thing and suddenly it's in public and you're selling it and so that you can no longer get a patent, what can a person give a patent attorney to make it so that it's a minimum cost to get the patent done?
Well, maybe part of it will start with the patent attorney you hire. They have a wide range of costs. So finding one that's specializing in startups, who has experience, but also caters to the startup community, I think would be a good place to start. I think also, without getting into too much details, trying to file a provisional application might be helpful if you're not sure about whether or not the invention is going to be valuable yet, if you're still sort of in the preliminary stages. But I do have to put one caveat on that, is sometimes people will file very, very cheap, shoddy provisionals and think that that is going to protect their idea as they go on, and then try to convert that into a more formal patent. They often find out that the disclosure is so bad and incomplete that it actually doesn't just protect the idea later on. And then that can lead to some problems with the intervening time that you've been trying to market it and things like that, causing becoming prior art to the subsequent more formal patent. So it's not easy, I'll put it that way. And cheap only gets you so far, I think, when it comes to drafting a patent application.
Yeah. Wouldn't recommend like reading the MPEP and then figuring out how to do a pro se before you
do it yourself. Would I recommend reading a medical textbook and then diagnosing my own illnesses? Probably not, but I might get it right.
Well, I'll tell you what we tell the undergraduates for in the friendly advice category. There's a book called Patent Pending in 24 Hours that we send everybody to.
And I mean, there are creative solutions too that you might find depending on the invention and with some caveats, but fee deferrals, investors, there are ways that if the invention is important enough and something that might be of interest to enough people, there might be ways of figuring out that fee structure in a different way.
Yeah, that is an excellent point.
There is a person back there.
So speaking of the devil, I've issued over 1,000 patents, and I do serve entrepreneurs. I'm Rick Morton. But so when somebody says patent yourself, I say, well, read "Fly It Yourself" by John Denver. Sorry about that. But I guarantee you, if I meet you in court and you have written your own claims, I will crush you within 2 summary judgment efforts. So Oh, I have a funny little troll thing, a Colorado patent troll group, and so we haven't gotten a client from that website, but I have sued Apple, Walmart. I'm in battle with Amazon right now. The biggest law firms. I've worked with Dorsey and some other guys, Sheridan, but simple little patents are the easiest to make money on and the easiest to knock off, and therefore they are very good to have trolls around. And the problem, and I review every patent filed every morning, 60% are trolls. There's one patent, there's 15 guys, Walmart, Amazon, everybody's selling the cash register and the cash register manufacturer who may no longer be around. But at any rate, if you invent something simple, sidewalk chalk, Boulder, did you know that? Housewife wanted her kids to draw on the ground, became a millionaire, and couldn't possibly enforce that patent. And it's a real good story. It was rice and flour and eggs and coloring, etc., and it's right here. So trolls like us lawyers that play both sides, defense, hourly, troll, percentage, there's a market to help little people with little inventions. Probably not thermodynamic, change of a turbine, but simply sidewalk chalk, and you're sitting there with this terribly 100-year-old court system. The real problem is American court system. Unlike Germany's, we don't have a small claims court for patents. We should. And maybe my grandchildren will see us, an evolution. But I would say those with some money around should work on our court system and not be messing around with 101 and, reducing damages. So anyway, the Colorado patent trolls are not a bad word, is my point. And certainly those of you that come up with the sidewalk chalk, the dog frisbee, the folding dog cup that fits in your pocket so you can come out and feed your dog water on a boat. These things need lawyers that'll swing the bat, hit Walmart, hit Amazon, who have gone to China, had it made, stolen it, perhaps taken over a whole industry, like folding luggage for computers, and then marketing it. So there's two sides to the troll story. See you later. Yeah.
Rick, I'm going to recharacterize that just a little bit, just to ask it in terms of the tech transfer side of this question as well. Is there a difference in maybe the market, the commercialization market that you might have for an invention that factors into your decision about whether to pursue patent rights or to help that researcher, that academic person that's come to you? I mean, if it's a small invention with a smaller market, does that factor into what you do?
Oh yeah, if the market isn't big enough, then that absolutely factors into the decision. But also we have to talk about the commercialization path, talk about whether it's consistent with their overall strategy for their research lab, and put it into the bigger picture.
Okay.
CU did sue and got a big win on a contingent lawsuit. It was about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thanks. I want to go back to Kate's comment that collaboration and open innovation models seems to be where a lot of the innovative activity and creativity is at, and in some tension with Eugene's concerns associated with the protectability about that. Many open innovation projects think peer production, such as Wikipedia or open source software like Apache. You don't monetize it directly as a participant. It's indirect appropriation, right? So IBM contributes to Apache's development, not because they're going to directly monetize the open source software, but because they're going to sell services on top of it. Do we need to start thinking about indirect appropriation monetization models on campus? And are there ways that you're seeing this work elsewhere that we might think about that playbook here?
Yes, and it's all about the trademark, believe it or not. So creating a new field of knowledge, creating a breakthrough innovation, and then teaching training and certification classes to industry practitioners. Great business model. There's a lot of business models out there that are very consistent with our mission on the education side, and everything, the research and knowledge dissemination, education side. And I think that it's too bad Tom Check couldn't make it. There was just a National Academies report that observed that there's a real change in federal funding for research, and that what has to happen now is that technology transfer offices need to start experimenting. And that's the National Academy saying that. I mean, so we're about to embark in an era of experimentation with business models, monetization models of knowledge and know-how.
I'm really excited to hear Kate talk about that, because I agree. I think that gray sticky piece that is scary is really exciting, and that if we can find a way to make that easier for people to co-create early on, collaborate, really be open, that you're going to see science, medicine, technologies that you've never seen before. And so I think this is a great room full of people, and maybe this is the room that could make that happen. So I challenge you to do that, because I would love to see that.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. We are actually out of time. If everyone can please join me in thanking our panel, and we have a reception right outside. Sure.
Stand or sit?
Stand.
All right.